Okay, we've been in John chapter 9, or we started last Sunday. We're still there. And we're going to look at the subject of Pharisees. You know what Pharisees are? They're the super religious, hyper religious, self righteous kind of people. And Jesus is dealing with them. Now remember the context of John chapter 9. Jesus had healed a blind man. He was blind from birth, and when Jesus met him, we saw this last time, Jesus spit on the ground, and he made clay from his saliva and the dirt, and he rubbed it on the man's eyes, and he told the man to go down to the pool of Siloam and wash his eyes, and he washed his eyes, and the man could see, and people were shocked. They didn't know what to do. So the man goes back home, and in John chapter 9, oops, I'm in Romans chapter 9. Did I say John 9? Yes, I did. It was here earlier. Fix that problem for next service. In John chapter 9, after the man was healed, he goes back, verse 8, and he sees his neighbors, and they look at him, and they're thinking, I think this is the man who was previously blind, and he was a beggar. Verse 9, and some said, this is him. Others said, no, he's like him. And then he said, I am he, it's me. Therefore they said to him, how were your eyes open? He answered and he said, a man called Jesus made clay and he anointed my eyes. And he said to me, go to the pool of Siloam and wash. So I went and I washed and I received sight. And then they said to him, where is this man? He said, I don't know where he is. So that's where we left off. He goes to his neighbors first. He goes to his family first. And then we pick up from there in verse 13. And they brought him who formerly was blind to the Pharisees, the super religious, super self-righteous religious leaders. So they brought the man who was formerly blind to the Pharisees, and now it was the Sabbath, when Jesus made the clay and opened his eyes. And the Pharisees asked the man again how he had received his sight. And he said to them, he, that be Jesus, he put clay on my eyes, and I washed, and I can see. It's that simple. Therefore some of the Pharisees said, this man, Jesus, is not from God because he does not keep the Sabbath. Others said, how can a man who is a sinner do such things? And there was division among them. And they said to the blind man again, what do you say about this man Jesus? Because he opened your eyes. And the man who was formerly blind said, I say that this man is a prophet. Years ago, our missions team was down in Ensenada. And one of the workers that had joined them on that particular trip was a man who was blind, and he was from another church. And they got to know the man, and they found out that he lives in one of the beach communities of Southern California, and he wears a sandwich board sign, and he stands and walks around with it on him. On one side, the sign says, Jesus saves. On the other side, the sign said, ask me how. This is like this man. Without those words, we're going to get to the point where the Pharisees, the religious people, are so bothered about Jesus and this man being healed that he says, I don't know how it all went down, but this much I know. Once I was blind, and now I see, and it was that man, Jesus, who's the one who did this for me. With this as the background, let's start off with this question. From whom is the new Christian likely to receive the most encouragement? And a second part, same question, from whom is the new Christian likely to receive the most discouragement? I think it works a lot like it does with this man who was born blind, who now can see. You would think that his family, his friends, his neighbors would give him great encouragement. You would think that he would go to the synagogue where the religious leaders are, who are supposed to be representing God, and they would say, woohoo, and they would give him the most encouragement. But it turns out his discouragement came from various people. We're going to see in a few minutes his neighbors. Some of the neighbors don't even know if it's the same guy. It couldn't possibly be the same guy. His parents aren't real sure what to do with him. We're going to see that in a few minutes. But the most discouragement came from the religious leaders, the people who are involved in the synagogue. I say this as a warning to you and I. I think we need to be very cautious and very careful on this subject. Because within the church, we can become very much like a Pharisee. We can become very self-righteous, just like they did back then. Sometimes a person comes to faith in Christ, and we start having issues with them because the sins they struggle with are not the sins I struggle with. The temptations they deal with, I would never be tempted by such a thing as that. And we can become very pharisaical, and we can look at people, and outwardly we can appear very religious, but inwardly, like the Pharisees, we can have our self-righteous ways and find fault with others and how other Christians do, etc., 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 whatever it is. If they are really saved, then they would live and think and eat and drink and look like I do. If they were really saved, then they would dress like I dress. Just for the record, every once in a while I'll get somebody who will say, well, I can't believe the way you dress as a pastor up there. Some people think you should dress with a robe on. Other people think I have to wear a suit all the time. Others say, well, you shouldn't wear slacks. You should only wear jeans up there. People have all their different crazy ideas on how you're supposed to dress as a pastor. Recently, we received a very angry email from someone who was bothered because I have a little bit of hair on my face, and Pastor Craig had done announcements, and he has a lot more hair on his face. How could you even be saved, literally, if you have any hair on your face as a man? Thinking, where do people get these things? Just for the record, I dress like I dress on Sundays. Here's how it works, all right? I open up my closet, I turn on the light, I look, and I say, that's clean. And let's see, yesterday, what did I eat? Okay, that should fit me today. That's kind of how it is. And then that's how I get ready. But anybody else like me? Oh, praise the Lord. I thought I might be the only one who does these kind of things. Listen, here's what we learned from the Pharisees. First takeaway is this. Don't look down on people unless you are helping them up. Again, we tend to find fault with others when their issues aren't the same as our issues. We can not care for others. We can be bitter towards others. We can be jealous of others. You know the reason why we find fault with other people? Often, it's a pride thing that we have. And when we push somebody else down, that's how we lift ourselves up, because we can't lift ourselves up. So we just push others down to make us appear higher. How many of you, this is one of my favorite movies, no doubt one of my favorite Christmas movies, A Christmas Story. You know the Red Ryder BB gun, right? How many of you know that? That's a bunch of you. Okay. Yeah, I love that movie. I watch it like 100 times every Christmas. And there's a scene in there where this kid, he wants a Red Ryder BB gun for Christmas. And everywhere he goes asking for the BB gun, they tell him, you can't have one. You'll shoot your eye out. So he finally has this big chance to go to Santa Claus. And he's got to wait in line, and Santa Claus is at the top of the slide, and then the kid gets up there, Santa Claus, and he tells Santa Claus what he wants, and then the kid goes down the slide, right? It's kind of a cool little thing, I guess. If you like slides, looks like fun. So he goes up to Santa Claus, he tells him he wants a Red Ryder BB gun. He goes, you'll shoot your eye out. But how it sets up is the kid starts going down the slide before he asks for his wish, so he climbs back up the slide. And he says to Santa, I want a Red Ryder BB gun. Santa Claus takes his foot with a big boot. You know that scene? Pushes him with his foot down the slide. We do that. And we push each other down, and we take our boot or whatever it is. We need to be really careful. I want to encourage you before we move on. Don't look down on people unless you're looking at helping them to get up. When we look at people, pray for them. When you have a bad thought that comes against somebody, turn it into a blessing. I learned this principle years ago, and I still have to apply it all the time and remember to apply it. You pray for blessings on people. What's wrong with praying for blessings on people? Lord, will you bless that person? Lord, I want you to encourage that person. And then we say to ourselves, well, I don't want to pray for blessings on them. I want God's heavy hand to come down on them. I want God to see in them what I see in them. I mean, we kind of get that way. Forget about it. If a person is truly blessed by the Lord, you know what's going to happen? It's going to be a spiritual blessing. They're going to be drawn closer to the Lord, and the Lord's going to work out whatever's going on in their heart. But the biggest problem that you have is not them. The biggest problem you have is you. And it gets our focus right. And instead of pushing people down, we help other people up. That being said, there are 3 attacks that these religious leaders, these Pharisees, these do-gooders have against this man who was born blind. The first attack, it comes to him, number 1, they attack his faith. In verse 13, he had already gone to his neighbors and said, I once was blind, and now I see. They say, how is this? I don't know. So verse 13, the neighbors come, and the neighbors bring him to the Pharisees. We can figure out just from the context of it being the Jewish faith 2,000 years ago that the neighbors bring him to the Pharisees, so the Pharisees would say, yes, this is a genuine healing. So they're looking for confirmation. Is this real? But they get there and that's not what happens. They bring the man who was formerly blind to the Pharisees, and the Pharisees know it was Jesus that he had contact with, and it bothers them, and their hatred for Jesus was greater than their love for this man. Their love for keeping their rules, not God's rules. Their love for keeping their rules was greater than mercy toward an individual who was born blind, who now can see. Jesus, the text tells us, performed this miracle on the Sabbath. So verse 16 says, the Pharisees respond, the religious leaders respond, and they say, this man, this Jesus who healed you, this man is not from God because he does not keep the Sabbath. And then in verse 17, it reads, they said to the blind man, so what do you say about him? Because he opened up your eyes. So I'll tell you what I say about him. You can say whatever you want. You say he's not from God. You say he's a sinner. I'll tell you what. I say he's a prophet. That's what I say. And you guys have a problem. But I was blind, and now I see. This man's faith is growing. Back in verse 11, where we read earlier from, he calls Jesus this man. He made mud and he put it in my eyes and I could see. He started out saying he was a man. Now in verse 17, he's saying, call him what you want, he's a prophet. We can see him growing just in a couple of minutes as the questions are coming at him. His faith is being attacked, and man, he is growing in his faith. He's just been introduced to Jesus. He's just been touched by Jesus, and no sooner is he introduced to Jesus and something totally awesome happens to him, the attacks start to come. Isn't that how it works? It's funny how it is. When you first get saved, if you come from a family that wasn't religious, you get saved and you go back home and you tell your family or tell your friends, hey, guess what? I'm born again. They look at you like this. Are you crazy? Get away from us. What's the matter with you? That kind of thing, right? That was my experience with many people. You must have joined a cult. What is wrong with our son? What's the problem here? Their problem was with Jesus, but the Sabbath was their excuse. I got a problem with the way the pastor dresses. I got a problem with the way the sanctuary looks. I got a problem with this. I got a problem with that. The problem is our sin and needing to surrender ourselves to the Lord, and we don't want to do that. The Pharisees didn't want to do that, but the worst part is there are people who can go to church all their life and be just like this, just like the Pharisees. And we can live by our set of rules, which is all they are doing. In their mind, if I keep the rules, I'm close to God. And if you keep the rules that I set, then you are close to God. It's legalism. That's the Pharisaical approach. And in the church, man, we should not be this way. Think of it like this. Back to the issue of doing this miracle on the Sabbath. By making clay, the Pharisees reasoned that Jesus was working on the Sabbath. It was manual labor. Um, he spit on the ground, makes clay, and puts it on the man's eyes. That's manual labor. You shouldn't be working on the Sabbath. I've shared some of those Sabbath stories with you before. You go to Israel, you see the Sabbath elevator, the Shabbat elevator. Remember that one? I've shared it with you. When you go to Israel on the Sabbath, on Saturday, do not get on the Sabbath elevator unless you want to stop at every single floor, because it will stop at every single floor. Let's say you're on the 15th floor. You want to go from ground, you want to go up to the 15th floor. All right, normally you get on an elevator, you press 15, and you go up to the 15th floor. On the Sabbath day, in the Sabbath elevator, you get on the Sabbath elevator, you don't press 15. All the numbers have been pressed for you. And it stops at every single floor. It is going to take you quite a while to get up to the 15th floor. The reason why is because pressing a button on the Sabbath constitutes work. The elevator's doing the work, but it's that same concept, right? Here's another one. Again, these rules, they're just added. These are rules of men, not rules of God. But they had decided that you could not carry a handkerchief downstairs, because carrying a handkerchief downstairs on the Sabbath would be work. But there was a loophole that they found. A loophole they made up. You couldn't carry a handkerchief downstairs, but you could put it around your neck and walk downstairs. That kind of stuff, the hypocrisy, the self-righteous stuff. So you can't carry a handkerchief. Well, wait a minute, I need it downstairs. I'm in charge of the rule keeping. I'll make my own loophole and I won't tell anybody. I mean, it's that kind of thing. So this is the environment Jesus is dealing with. You couldn't make, Jesus had made clay with his saliva in the dirt, so that was working on the Sabbath. That was manual labor. And by rubbing the clay on his eyes, Jesus was practicing medicine on the Sabbath. So this is the mentality. They hated Jesus. He's stealing their thunder. They're in charge of the rules, and you can oppress people when you're the rule maker. And they had no mercy at all towards this man. They didn't care. The man was just an object. Second takeaway. So the first takeaway, don't look down on people unless you are helping them up. Second takeaway, you can't make yourself love God nor others by keeping the rules. We tend to have critical eyes. I shouldn't say we. I tend to have a critical eye. And God convicts me of this. And that's the reason why I need to pray every time negative thoughts come in. I need to pray positively. I found it's much more helpful. My thoughts immediately change, and you know what? It helps me to actually want to see some other people be blessed as I pray for them. God, whatever it is you want to do. But if you're like me, you might think sometimes with a critical eye. Think of it like this. If you hold out your arms in front of you and you put your fingers in a triangle, you know this if you're like an eye doctor or something like that. Some people know this. I didn't learn this until not too long ago. You make a triangle, you focus on an object. Right now I'm focusing on the exit sign, which some of you are thinking, I wish I could exit because this guy's annoying me. But that's another subject. So I put my fingers in a triangle and I focus on an object. If I close my eye and my one eye and it doesn't move, that object doesn't move, then that's my dominant eye, that's my good eye, that's my strong eye. If I close my other eye and it's suddenly out of the picture, that's my weak eye. I found this out years ago when Clay Hamilton was teaching me how to shoot a shotgun. He said, you got to use your good eye or you're going to miss your target every time. With that, I think many people are looking at life through their weak eye, through their critical eye. And if you have a critical eye, you'll find something wrong with everything. You won't hit the necessary target. And that's exactly what the Pharisees did. They were so focused on the law that they couldn't see past it. And so Jesus is calling them on the carpet. You say you love God, you don't love God because you would love me. You say you love God, you don't love God because you would love this man who was born blind. You don't care about him. All you care about, you got your critical eye, you're putting down others, you got your foot on them, you got your rules that you've made. The Old Testament speaks to this. What is it that God really desires from us? In the book of Psalms, the psalmist wrote in Psalm 51, "For you do not desire sacrifice, or else I would give it. You do not delight in burnt offering." That's the religious ceremony. All the religious ceremonies of the Old Testament all pointed to Jesus Christ, who is the offering, who is the sacrifice. That's what they were there for. The religious ceremony isn't going to save you. And then he says this, the sacrifices of God are a broken spirit, a broken and contrite heart. These, O God, you will not despise. That word contrite, it literally means a humbled heart. It comes from a person who's been through the mess. They've come in and realized, I'm not as good as I thought I was. You've humbled me, God. I need you. I need your forgiveness because my religious way ain't going to do it. Folks, I want to encourage you and implore you, if you go to church and you have not submitted to Christ and you live by a set of rules and you think it's this church or any church you go to, by going to church, I'm going to heaven. You're not. You're not. That's the Pharisaical approach. I'm good enough. I follow the rules, my rules, or the rules that the church gives me. You know, every church has its own kind of set of community culture rules. A lot of them are unspoken. Some are spoken in some churches. Some churches, a woman can really be judged by whether or not they wear a dress. If you wear a dress, you're evil. If you don't wear a dress, you're evil. If your hair's short, you're evil. If your hair's long, you're evil. Yeah, you start looking at these things. If you wear a hat, if you don't wear a hat, there's cultural things within churches. Like I said earlier, hair on my face, hair on Pastor Craig's face. Listen, what God's looking for is a heart and spirit that is right with him. And so it says, Lord, I need you. Micah wrote, he has shown you, O man, what is good, and what does the Lord require of you? But to do justly, to love mercy, to walk humbly with your God. These religious people had no sense of justice. They wanted to kill Jesus because he broke their rules. They had no desire for mercy. They were upset that a blind man was healed. And certainly they had no concept of being humble with God. They put themselves above God by taking pride in their religious things. Their problem was they didn't love God. They didn't have a broken heart, a contrite spirit. They weren't walking humbly. They didn't do justly. They didn't love mercy. It was not God. And so they couldn't love this blind man. It was religion. It was religion. Second takeaway, you can't make yourself love God nor others by keeping the rules. A third takeaway, in the big picture, don't lose sight of what is important versus what isn't important. Socrates said, I go around doing nothing but persuading both young and old not to care for your body or your wealth in preference to your soul. Now, Socrates wasn't this great spiritual man in the Old Testament, but that's a lot of wisdom. As one person said, this life is full of props. How we work in this world with all our props, the cars, the trucks, the boats, the motorhomes, the houses. None of those things are evil or good in and of themselves. It's us, but they're like props. Those things aren't going to heaven with us. But I found this interesting. Randy Alcorn, who is one of my favorite teachers, sometimes invites his listeners to go for an imaginary ride. We're in line behind a few dozen pickups. They are filled with old furniture and rusted refrigerators and obsolete TV sets and velvet pictures of Elvis. One by one, they stop at the top of the hill. The drivers get out, and throw the stuff from their trucks over the edge of the hill to whatever's below. You get out of your car to look over the edge and see what's going on. You see nothing but acres and acres of junk. It's old stuff home. It used to be called a junkyard or a dump, but nobody wants to live next to one of those, so now we call it a landfill. Garbage and dump and junk are sad words, but filling up land with more land sounds positive. Who doesn't want the world to have more land? It's a dump all the same. And that's where old stuff goes to die. Flat screen TVs, sub-zero refrigerators that don't actually reach sub-zero, toasters and Twinkies and pieces of old Lear jets will rot next to each other in the democracy of decay. It's not that such treasures are bad, it's that they won't last. Stuff is a foolish investment. I want to encourage you to think of this takeaway this week. What's really important? What's not? All you do for God's kingdom will last forever. I've done a lot of memorial services and funeral services over the years. Several years ago, I did a memorial service for a lady, a mom and a grandma. It was holiday time, Christmas or Thanksgiving, I can't remember. And she was in the kitchen cooking. The rest of the family is partying and having fun. They heard a thump. They go into the kitchen. Mom's dead. I did a memorial service for a friend of mine, almost exact same scenario. His father-in-law it was on Christmas Day, walking through the house, just dead, widowmaker. I've done services for heart trouble people, people who have cancer, for people who've died in car accidents, for people who've died from the widowmaker, for babies, for children, for old people. As one author put it, he was referring to someone that he knew. The family sat around to have dinner, and they pray, and right there at the dinner table, the person died. He writes, you sit down at dinner, and life as you know it just ends. So everyone has to decide what to do with the props, because life is full of props. What's important? Are the props important? So we start looking at things. Folks, I can't encourage you enough. We will give an account to the Lord for everything. To these men, the most important thing was keeping the rules. Not God's rules. It was keeping their rules. They were the leaders of the synagogue. People are more important. Relationships are more important. I was talking with my son just recently, and we were talking about life. You know, you're getting older. You know, when you're a teenager, man, you're all over the map, right? And I just said, in the process, I said, you need to think through relationships, because relationships are a big deal. I love my son. I said, when you get through life, you start to realize, I'm almost 42 years old, and I've realized in my long life, what? Some of you are thinking, wow, he is quite handsome for a 42-year-old man. And others of you are thinking, that guy looks awful. Oh my, he's awful for a 75-year-old man. He looks bad. I get it. I'll be 60 soon. Not real soon though, but soon enough. Soon enough. But you find out things. Your family really matters. It really matters. Even if they're not saved, they really, really, really matter. Dear friends really matter, because you're going to have a whole lot of acquaintances in life. And in the process, we love one another. We've got to figure out what's important and what's not important, what matters and what doesn't matter. They attack his faith. Number two, they attack, I'm out of time. They attack his parents. You ready to go super fast? Okay. It was my wife's fault. She was up here doing this long announcement. It's like, she's not, see what I do to myself? I get myself so much trouble. Here we go, ready? Let's go, fast. but the Jews did not believe concerning the blind man that he had been blind and received his sight until they called his parents of him who had received his sight. And they asked him, saying, "Is this your son who you say was born blind? How then does he now see?" His parents answered them and said, "We know that this is our son and that he was born blind, but by what means he now sees, we don't know. Or who opened his eyes, we do not know. He is of age. You ask him. He'll speak for himself." His parents said these things because they feared the Jews, for the Jews had agreed already that if anyone confessed that he was Christ, that Jesus was the Christ, that they would be put out of the synagogue. Therefore, his parents said, "He's of age, ask him." So they go after his parents. "What do you say? Is this your son? Can he see?" You ask him. I mean, they don't want to be kicked out of the synagogue. It meant having your life destroyed is what it really meant. You wouldn't have a job anymore. You wouldn't have a place to live, all that. But they basically say, they threw their son over to the lions. Kick him out. It's his problem. Don't get mad at us. Wow. I had a lot more to say on this, but I don't got time. So number three, notice, so they attack his faith, they attack his parents. Finally, they attack the one that gave him hope. So the religious leaders, verse 24, again they called the man who was blind and they said to him, "Give God the glory. We know that this man is a sinner." In other words, we know Jesus is a sinner. And he answered and said, "Whether or not he's a sinner, I don't know. But one thing I know, that though I was blind, now I see." And they said to him again, "What did he do to you? How did he open your eyes?" He answered them, "I told you already. You didn't listen." I love this. Why do you want to hear it again? Do you also want to become one of his disciples? I bet that made them so mad. That's great. You got to love that. And then they reviled him and said, "You are one of his disciples, but we are Moses' disciples. We know that God spoke to Moses. As for this fellow, we don't know where he is from." I love how that whole thing goes. Do you also want to be like him? Do you also want to be one of his followers? I mean, what a shot that was. Last takeaway. I had a lot more to say the next week. Here's the last takeaway. It says, you have hope. Pass it out. Pass it out. Notice what this blind man does. He's not a theologian. He doesn't have all this great oratory skills. He doesn't know the scriptures. But he says this much I know. This man touched me. I think he's a prophet. And I'll tell you this, once I was blind, now I see. That's all he could do. And he did what he could do. I'll close with this story. It's one of my favorite stories. I shared it here several years ago. So if you're here, you probably forgot it, and you're going to need to be reminded. But I love this story. Let me tell you of my favorite story of one person's search for a mission, writes the author, the story of Johnny the Bagger. Johnny works at a grocery store. One day he went to a training event led by a speaker named Barbara. Barbara was talking to 3,000 frontline workers for a supermarket chain, truck drivers, cashiers, and stockers. Barbara was speaking on how people can make a difference. She described how every interaction with another person is a chance to create a memory, to bless someone's life. She talked about how important it is to look for those moments. She placed on the walls, as she always does when she speaks, posters with inspiring sayings. She told some stories and then went home, but she left her phone number behind. She invited the people at the conference to give her a call if they wanted to talk more about something she said. About a month later, Barbara received a call from one of the people at the session, a 19-year-old bagger named Johnny. Johnny proudly informed her that he had Down syndrome, and then he told her his story. "Barbara, I liked what you talked about, but I didn't think I could do anything special for our customers. After all, I'm just a bagger." And then he had an idea. He decided that every night when he came home from work, He would find a thought for the day for his next shift. It would be something positive, some reminder of how good it was to be alive, or how much people matter, or how many gifts we are surrounded by. If he couldn't find one, he would make one up. Every night, his dad would help him enter the saying 6 times on a page on the computer. Then Johnny would print 50 pages. He would take out a pair of scissors and carefully cut 300 copies and sign every one. Johnny put the stack of pages next to him while he worked. Each time he finished bagging someone's groceries, he would put his saying on top of the last bag. And then he would stop what he was doing, look the person straight in the eye, and say, "I have put a great saying in your bag. I hope it helps you have a good day. Thanks for coming here." A month later, the store manager called Barbara. "Barbara, you won't believe what's happened here. I was making my rounds, and when I got up to the cash registers, the line at Johnny's checkout was 3 times longer than anyone else's. It went all the way down the frozen food aisle. The manager got on the loudspeaker to get more checkout lines open, but he couldn't get any of the customers to move. They said, 'That's okay, we'll wait. We want to be in Johnny's line.' One woman came up to him and grabbed his hand, saying, 'I used to shop in your store once a week. Now I come in every time I go by. I want to get Johnny's thought for the day.' Johnny is doing more than filling bags with groceries. He's filling lives with hope." With that, you and I, we have the hope of the Lord Jesus Christ. These aren't just sayings. We have the word of life. Once I was blind, now I see. If that's all you know, you are saved. May we be faithful to pass out the hope that we have in the Lord Jesus Christ. We can get caught up in rules. We can get caught up in regulations. We can look down on people because they don't do things the way that we think they should be done. Get that garbage out of your head. There's people that Jesus loves, and he wants to use you and I to pass out the message of hope. Lord, we thank you.